Oh my God, I'm going to start crying. I'm going to start crying because I can't believe what a cool show this is and what an amazing conversation this is and the intention behind what you're doing. Because I can feel the intention to activate possibility and impact in the person who is listening.
Welcome to the premiere episode of My Legacy. I'm Craig Kielburger, one of your co-hosts, and I couldn't be more excited to launch this journey with all of you today. And what makes this show truly unique is we don't just hear from incredible individuals. We sit down with the people who know them best. They bring along their plus one, a sibling, close friend, parent, or partner. These heartfelt conversations uncover the challenges, triumphs, and insights that have shaped their lives and their legacies. Our guests are opening up in ways they haven't before, sharing stories and perspectives that you won't hear anywhere else. And today, we'll be giving you an exclusive sneak peek into the heart of this podcast, an intimate, behind-the-scenes look at incredible stories, conversations, and legacies we'll be sharing with you. And with that, it's my privilege to introduce one of my co-hosts, someone whose life and work are a continuation of his father's extraordinary legacy, Martin Luther King III. Now, Martin, you become a dear friend, and there's many things I've learned about you over the dozen plus years we've known each other that our listeners may not know. For example, you are the single individual who has spent more intimate time with the icon that we know as Martin Luther King Jr. than anyone else in the world because, of course, he's your father. You know, I love the fact that you served as an elected official, choosing to put your hat in the ring in public service, and then eventually chose to no longer serve in only a domestic role, but to emerge as an international statesman, traveling the world, working on every inhabitable continent, advocating for peace and nonviolence. You were there moving forward democracy in South Africa, in fact, with Mandela when he was inaugurated, the first president of a free South Africa. But the part that I actually love about you the most, that not everyone knows, is because we've traveled so much together now, I have seen in communities across America and around the world how people respond to you, the emotion that you elicit in them. I've seen in Oakland, I remember that one gentleman who walked up to you who was formerly incarcerated and talked about how you gave him hope that he could turn his life towards service. And this, frankly, kind of tough-looking guy who was a little intimidating to those around us burst into tears and give you this giant hug. I have seen young and old women, including some, grandmothers who are like, 5 foot nothing, come up to you, hold your hand, and talk about how they marched with your parents. And I've seen students flock to you for photos and words of wisdom and mentorship and guidance. And I have seen you always be so generous with your time, to always be there loving and kinding and coaching them and supporting them. So I have to say, it is a privilege and pleasure not only to be a co-host with you here today, but just to call you a dear friend.
Thank you so much, Craig. It's an honor to be here and to celebrate my father's legacy on this meaningful day. And today I am excited to share stories about my family, but I'm most excited to introduce another of our co-hosts, my lovely, amazing wife, Arndrea Waters King, who, when I think about a twinkle consistently comes to my eye. I always am amazed by what she brings to the table every day, whether it's raising our daughter, Yolanda Renee. I try to help a little bit, but she is the champion. I would love to say that I brought her into the social justice movement, but that would not be true. She worked many years with Dr. C.T. Vivian, who was one of my father's lieutenants, and just a tremendous advocate for peace and justice. Arndrea worked in an organization that he co-founded called the Center for Democratic Renewal. It started off as the Anti-Klan Network. And what Arndrea did, one of the things she was responsible for was organizing the first hate crime summit, bringing together over 40 organizations. They were able to create legislation for hate crimes in the state of Georgia. And so this is over 20 years ago when you think about it. That is one of the things Arndrea does, as well as being the president of the Drum Major Institute, as well as being one who is a constant reinforcement of lifting up people when people are going through crisis. I've never seen anyone who's able to turn those situations around. that's my wife, Arndrea Waters King.
Thank you, honey. It's such a privilege to be here with all of you. Now, I am outnumbered by my male co-host, but I promise to continue to bring and lift up all voices, but particularly like that sacred feminine, the voices of women in these conversations. And I am thrilled to introduce our co-host, Marc Kielburger. And Marc, first and foremost, is a husband to a wonderful, wonderful woman, a father of two incredible girls, and also he is a tremendous dog lover. He also is a global humanitarian. He's organized and impacted millions, and that is literal, that is not an exaggeration, of young people and lives all around our world. And one of the things that I also find incredibly interesting is that he is an astute intellectual. He is a Rhodes Scholar. He's a Harvard grad. Yet he also has an insatiable curiosity. And he's able to use these, incredible intellectual gifts in a way that everyone can connect with him. And I truly admire that about him.
Well, Arndrea, thank you. And that's extremely kind. And Martin and Arndrea, and of course, Craig, we're so excited to have these conversations with you. And Arndrea, as you mentioned, I've got an amazing wife, and I have a 120-pound Bernese mountain dog, aptly named Daisy, as you mentioned. And my wife likes to joke that there's three of us in the relationship. And so I would like to formally introduce our final co-host, and that's, of course, my younger brother, Craig Kielburger. Here's three things I want to share about Craig. Number one is he's also a father, and he is a father of three remarkable boys who love him dearly and are rambunctious, caring, kind, vivacious, incredible kids. His wife is named Lisa. She's a psychologist. She has her PhD in psychology, and a rock to our collective family, not just Craig's family. Number two is very accomplished, New York Times bestselling author, member of the Order of Canada, many accolades and awards, including the Nelson Mandela Peace Leadership Award, spoken live to over 2 million people who've attended events and activities that we've put on. But he genuinely, sincerely, to the depth of his heart, cares about these social issues that we have all dedicated our lives to and for. And last but not least, when Craig was young, he had the opportunity to spend a remarkable day with the late Mother Teresa. And that had a huge, profound impact on his life, both emotionally, through the work that he does, and also his spiritual connection. Well, thank you, Marc. And for our listeners who could imagine when a brother introduces a fellow brother, it's deeply touching, and you never know if it's going to be an introduction or a roast. So I appreciate the kindness of that. And that's, I think, what makes this so special is that they're two brothers, and there's a married couple, and this is all about connection in my legacy. So whether it's connection through your biological family that Marc and I have, or your chosen family that you Martin and Arndrea have, this is what we want to welcome our guests into. And truly what makes it so unique is there's always the guest plus one who's part of these conversations, because it's more than just individuals sharing their stories. It's about sharing their connections, their reflections, their inspirations. It's about hearing from remarkable people the legacies that they're building and how you can apply it to your own life. So to have these icons that we all know, these stars and celebrities and change makers and activists and heroes sitting there, but to also talk with their spouse, their brother, their partner, their longtime childhood best friend, and to have these conversations that introduces a vulnerability, that introduces a raw honesty.
And this isn't the regular sound bites. It's not about promoting the next movie or the next book or the next, series or whatever it is. This is about who they are as people, what they care about, and who loves them most, or one of the people that do love them most is their guest on the show. And we get to hear about those individuals in such profound, awesome, cool, compassionate, loving ways.
One of my favorite moments is we've had a few conversations and they've looked at their +1 a little bit with trepidation on some of the answers that were forthcoming. I love the fact that it's so unscripted in that way. And so this gets to the connection that's part of the idea of each of our legacies. Because as we know, connection is what makes us human. It's what makes our legacy come alive.
You know, Craig, we have a fundamental human need for connection. It's something that anthropologists have shown us, scientists have shown us, academic literature has shown us. And as we become more isolated than ever in North America, especially, this need for connection, this need for reaching out, this need for these types of conversations has become even much more powerful.
And let us not forget that the very last book that Martin Luther King Jr. wrote was Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. I don't know of anyone that has lived through these last few years who has not felt a touch of chaos. And connection is about connecting with our families, with those whom we love, but it also ultimately is about building a community and getting to the beloved community that Martin Luther King Jr. Talked about and really charged us with.
Well, Martin, you've lived this your whole life, and why are you excited to embark upon this journey?
Well, I'm excited anytime we can create change. And the fact that I think this podcast has the true potential of changing and transforming lives. Everybody has a story, and it includes everyone and excludes no one. It really is about inclusiveness. If we're going to move this nation and the world forward, it has to be done collectively together. Doesn't mean we'll all move in the same exact direction. But, Dad so much and Mom talked about love and the power of love. And in a time when we are disconnecting more and more, but there's always the opportunity to connect. I talk about how when you're walking on the streets every day, we walk by people every day and don't ever say anything like, hello, good morning, how are you? You never know what that might do for someone who's going through a difficult time because everything is energy. And so the goal is to deposit as much positive energy as possible to elevate. It's elevating. That's what I'm excited about.
I love that, by the way. Everything is energy, and the goal is to deposit as much positive energy as possible. What a beautiful call to action.
It's so interesting because I think that every guest that has brought someone with them has added such an interesting dimension to who we think that person is or was, and it really talks about our common humanity. And there has not been one conversation that I personally have not felt very inspired by and had takeaways. And as a mother, that's very important. We're putting something out in the world that I am proud of. I think it truly is kind of injecting into humanity with these conversations, like this true challenge of connecting with each other and truly looking about building a true brotherhood and sisterhood and reminding us all that there is so much more that we have in common than that which we think would seek to divide us.
Martin, I can't get over it. I want to get your perspective on this. The number of conversations we've had with their incredible laughter and insights and wisdom in a joyous sense, but quite frankly, the number of tearful moments and heartfelt moments, and not just our guests crying, we're all crying at the same time. It's kind of like group therapy, but for the world. What's been some of your favorite moments?
I don't know if I want to say a favorite moment. We often know of the glory, but we don't know the story. When you hear the story, you really, truly admire, because everybody doesn't just arrive and they're at the top of their game. It's a process. And what is inspiring about it is it helps you come to the conclusion, that even I, whatever my story may be, no matter how minor or major it might be, I can do the things that I want to and ultimately realize my own dream. So I see that coming out of each and every one of these stories.
One thing I love about this podcast is the +1 concept. We had a powerful conversation with David Oyelowo and Nate Parker about resilience, redemption, and the power of friendship.
They absolutely blew me away.
I never thought two men could be so compassionate and loving towards each other.
And there was a heartfelt, incredibly honest and emotional conversation with Mel Robbins and her daughter Sawyer.
There's something about seeing mothers and daughters together, and the fact that they open up their lives so intimately with us was really extraordinary.
I was inspired by Mel opening up about how she hit rock bottom and how her daughter was there every step of the way and how they partially reconciled by the amazing work that Mel is now doing.
And I was the worst parent. I mean, there were times where she would come downstairs, and this I know you do remember, and she would find Chris and I asleep in the living room chair because we had passed out from bourbon, because we were trying to just suppress all the fear because it was just so overwhelming.
It was raw, it was honest, it was beautiful. And we sat down with Dr. Sanjay Gupta, America's doctor, and his wife Rebecca, talking about raising 3 daughters, almost 21 years of marriage.
Every time Rebecca is talking, Sanjay, you're just like looking at her and like just like
What's she
lining
about
up.
to say?
You're just like
Endearing love.
yeah, it's like you're just like lighting up in all the glow every time.
That is panic.
I was like, wow, she said that wrong.
and endearing love. Yes.
I like to keep him on his toes.
And of course, Billy Porter and his sister, Mary Martha.
It certainly was really beautiful to see siblings together and just talking about, all the wonderful dynamics and support that they have been to each other.
And there was the legendary and beloved actor and activist Martin Sheen, joined by a close friend who was nominated by Archbishop Desmond Tutu for a Nobel Peace Prize.
I was certainly so inspired by, Martin Sheen and Father the Deer, being an activist myself. It reinvigorates my own personal desire, looking at, I've done a few things, but it gives me the impression that there's so much more that needs to be done and that we all can do. So the inspiration comes from each and every person that we talk to.
I couldn't be prouder to be alongside with all of you on this incredible journey. And the premise behind this conversation, of course, was inspired by a book that we all co-authored called What is My Legacy? I'm so excited by this book, and I know you guys are as well. And we spent over 2 years researching, writing, interviewing, having hundreds of conversations. Martin, your father spoke about the beloved community. He preached about the beloved community, and this book hopefully moves us in a step forward. And I'm so excited because we have individuals who helped to contribute to this. Of course, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, wrote the foreword to the book. Contributors include people like Melinda French Gates, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, Billy Porter, Martin Sheen, Reverend Michael Beckwith, Simon Sinek, Dan Rather, Julia Roberts, Jay Shetty, Yara Shahidi, and so many others. But that's not how we met, even though, of course, we loved writing that book together, and it was truly a labor of love. We met about 15 years ago, Martin. First, of course, Craig and I got to know you, and then, of course, your amazing wife. But, Arndrea, you want to provide a little bit of context to this incredible relationship that now spans almost a decade and a half.
Martin met you first, and, he was, working with you all a lot, traveling quite a bit. Yolanda and I, and Martin would, talk about this incredible work and all of these young people that are so impacted by your work and, stadiums full of people and young people that are on fire for service and change. And so I really believe, representation is so important, and what children are exposed to is so incredibly important. And I really believe that, here she is in kindergarten seeing, all of these young people and meeting people that are, doing incredible things in the world. But not only that, seeing young people up on stage sharing and inspiring, that it gave her a vision that, you don't have to be, as she would call us, old. I don't think I'm old, in order to make a difference in the world and to facilitate change. And so then, fast forward just 3 years after that, when the call came 2 hours before she was, on stage in front of almost 1 million people, she was like, okay, I've seen this before. I've seen like a young person address crowds and share who they are. So I can do this. So
well done.
That's when we first met. And I always knew and wanted to do combined work with you all, to partnership, and because I really believe and know that that's how we can all truly, when I say all of us, I certainly mean the 4 of us, but I also mean the nation and the world, all of us working together. Like, that is how we can truly make a magnificent impact together.
Martin and Arndrea, for those listeners or viewers who haven't had a chance to get to know you as well as we have, could one of you or both of you perhaps tell us a little bit the story or the backstory of how you guys met?
Well, we were actually introduced on a blind date. Actually, there were two people that were out and they met each other, and they suggested that we meet each other. So we were given each other's phone numbers. We talked on the phone for a few times, and we agreed that we were going to meet. And the day and time that we had set, say it was 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock came and went. Martin wasn't there. 1:05 came and went. Martin wasn't there.
Ooh. Hopefully this doesn't go to 1:10, does it, Martin?
Oh, it went past 1:10, and by 1:10, I was livid. And I was like, well, but I knew that, for some reason, I knew that he would call because we had such great conversations. I also, though, had made the decision that he had absolutely 1,000% no chance of us ever meeting, dating, or connecting, period.
So did he show up at all, or what happened?
Well, then about 1:15, a friend who had been on some of the calls called and said, "I'm so sorry. Martin was called out of town on an emergency, and I was supposed to call earlier, and I'm so sorry, and can you reschedule?" I said, "Sure." So he said, "Okay, well, he'll pick you up next, Saturday at X amount of time." I said, no, that's okay. We can meet, because by this time I had made the decision that I was going to meet him so I can look him in his eyes, tell him off, tell him this is not how you treat a lady. I felt at this point like this was a mission for all female kind. For whomever, because at this point he had no absolutely chance with me, but I felt the need to make sure that whatever lady comes next, then that he would know how to treat them.
Take us to the second meeting then.
So the second meeting occurred on a Saturday date, maybe a week later, and we arrived. We is complicated. So I'll just say the person who works with me, who's one of my protectors, one of my dearest friends.
You had an advance team?
I did.
Advance team for a date.
Exactly.
Wow, Martin, you're just digging here.
Yeah.
And so we arrived, and he went in.
Yes.
To
survey? Okay. Evaluate? What's the word you're going to use here, Martin? Because you're in big trouble.
Let's see. But long and short,
You just wanted to make sure she was there.
That's right.
Right.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
And so then I came in, and we went to a table, and we talked. An hour and a half, and it was great.
Awesome.
She did not mention one time at that time that Phil didn't call me. So the conversation was, I guess, intriguing.
So was it love at first sight?
For those, by the way, if I may interject, who are not watching but listen to the podcast, he's holding her hand right now.
But she was just so amazing. First of all, she was beautiful then. She's even more beautiful now.
Well, when Phil came in, and then...
This is the advanced man.
The advanced man came in and went back out.
Yes.
I was like, oh, no, he's really... He was
He's
like,
really in trouble.
He's parking the car. And he went back out.
Did you think he was checking you out?
Yes, I did.
Oh, okay, just so everyone just want to make sure we understand.
So then I was like, oh, yeah, no, this is going to be 5 minutes, and I am out of here. This is... I definitely need to school this man.
Yes.
And
Yeah. You should have brought both him, Martin, and Phil together. You could have schooled them together.
Oh, yeah, that was the intention.
Okay. Okay, wow.
They were going to the woodshed.
The woodshed. I like it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, when Martin came in, there was just this immediate, anyone who's ever been in Martin's presence or met Martin, they can attest to just this extraordinary love and light that emanates from him.
Yes.
Which actually, frankly, I wasn't expecting. And that is what, I guess, disarmed me. And then I very quickly realized that this truly is one of the best men that I had ever met.
Wow.
So his heart saved him.
Wow. Well done. So what do you love most about your amazing wife?
There's not one specific thing that I love most. I love the fact that every day she wakes up, and the main thing is, regardless of what we're going through and what's going on in the world, and there are times when we all don't want to do things, she always does the right thing. Not sometimes, always.
What do you love most about Martin?
His heart.
His heart.
He truly leads and lives in the world with his heart. And I remember once the comedian Dick Gregory, when he was introducing Martin, talked about how he said, this man walks in love. And that is Martin. And it's that way on stage, off stage, at home. That and also his humor. He's extremely funny.
So I'm sure many of our viewers and listeners would love to know the fact that you have such wisdom as a couple, but you also, of course, have the only grandchild of Dr. King and Coretta Scott King. So much of the King's legacy, of course, will be continuously passed down to her. What's that like? What's that dynamic like, being a father and a mother, but also having to nurture and love and cherish a child that has, candidly, a lot of expectations likely on her shoulders?
For me, I think from the time that Yolanda was born, almost until now, one of the things that I have continually said to her is that being the grandchild of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King is something unique, but it's not what makes you important. But what does make you important is who you are as a child of God. And also to remember that that is the same thing that makes every person that you come in contact with important. And I think it's a good combination because in some ways there are certain things that about Yolanda and her upbringing and who she is that Martin can understand in a very unique way, being born into the legacy. And I think that there's a commonality that they have, it's different than marrying into the legacy. And I think my greatest gift to her is the gift of normalcy because I wasn't raised or born into that. So, and I think to also to have that balance and that gift is something that I'm intentional in trying to instill in her that groundedness and the normalcy of life.
We know your father, of course, as this incredible icon of civil rights, but to you, he was dad. Can you share with us some of the moments when he came back off being on the road and what it was like to spend time with him?
When I was a very young child, probably 7, 8, 9 years old, almost every week my father would travel somewhere. And I could see him walking up the stairs of our home. It was almost like he barely could make it up the stairs. But he understood, in retrospect, that while I have a small quantity of time, I want to create the best quality experience for my children. So we were so excited because Dad was coming home. And as I looked out and saw him carrying the weight of the world, when he saw us, that energy shifted dramatically to like a surge. And it was like, Daddy's home. And he would, smile, big smile would come over his face. And he devoted all his time towards satisfying us at that moment.
Of course, you're the parents, the only grandchild of Dr. King and Coretta Scott King. How do you help her connect with him and his work?
The blessing is that there are many speeches of her grandfather and interviews, and certainly there are many stories that she hears directly from Martin. But it's interesting because I think when it really dawned on me how much she really sought and in a real sense miss the human connection with him is that, we go quite often to the memorial in D.C. To her grandfather. And I noticed when she was little that there is this one particular picture that she always was adamant that we had to get, where she's kind of sitting. There's like this small little ledge that,
On the King Memorial.
on the King
itself.
Memorial, like on the Stone of Hope where he's coming out of. There's like this, and every time she was like, I want to sit there, I want to sit there. And so, we always took that picture there. And then one time she said to me, Mommy, the reason that I like sitting there is that this is the closest that I can ever be to sitting in his lap.
Wow.
And so that is when it really also dawned on me and I think, again, that people see certain aspects of the King legacy, but even like so many other families, but then also the trauma. I think also that's one of the reasons she, at a young age, she spoke out on gun violence. She worked with the Parkland students and, spoke at the rally with 800,000 students with only 2 hours notice.
Wow.
But she was always very passionate about gun violence, not only being raised during a time where lockdowns and these things are all too common, but she was always cognizant that her grandfather and her great-grandmother were not here because of guns and gun violence. So
Can you pause on that? Because that's a really important point, because I don't think many of our viewers or listeners may know the extent of the trauma that the King family has gone through. And you've just alluded to that. Can one of you just fill in the blanks so everybody has a chance to understand?
So certainly at 10 years old, I think many know that my father was assassinated. On that day of April 4th, my mom lost her husband, and the four of us lost our father. So that's the greatest trauma that I believe I had gone through in my life then. What none of us knew was 5 years later, my grandmother was going to be assassinated in the church while playing the Lord's Prayer. Now, people are always inflicted with tragedy, so we're not the first ones. We were not the first ones, but at an early age, it was the way it was not an accident. It was intentional. Someone came intentionally to kill Dad. Someone came intentionally to kill Dad's mom. And it really was how we chose to deal with it by seeing we'd been taught as kids that to forgive that which is terrible and nonviolence. Dad being the preeminent civil rights leader, one of the preeminent civil rights leaders in our society. We had been taught a strong foundation. We had a strong spiritual foundation, but still, it's tough. And what my grandfather did was he publicly stated, I refuse to allow the man that killed my lovely wife, nor the man that killed my son, to reduce me to hatred. I love everybody. I'm every man's brother. In fact, he went to visit the man who killed his wife. And he went down to the jail where the man was being held, because this was at the church.
The man who had assassinated your grandmother.
My grandmother.
during Sunday service.
And it was during Sunday service. Yeah. So Granddaddy that afternoon went down to see the man who was being held in the mental ward at the hospital in Atlanta. And he visited with him and he said, son, why did you kill my lovely wife? And the guy looked at him and said, when I get out of here, I'm going to come back and get you. And Granddaddy said, well, son, I'm going to pray for you, because that's who he was and what he believed. Interestingly enough, if he had taken he had a cane, he walked with a cane back then, but he could have taken that cane and hit the man in the head. But he did not do that. He said, son, I'm going to pray for you because I know prayer changes things. Now, that's a powerful example. I was not physically there that day, but my brother and my cousin were. And so to hear this story shared over and over again made a profound impact upon me. So I share this story often with young kids because I believe that there's merit to, again, if I had been bitter and hostile, people would understand. But I'm thankful that I chose to exhibit what I call positive energy and saying, oh, that greatly impacted my life, but I choose not to go continuing to hate others. Hate can never solve the issue. Only love can do that. Dad would say darkness can't put out darkness. Only light can do that. I hope that every time I have an opportunity, I am depositing energy, positive energy, light into the world.
One of the things that has dawned on me, even in this conversation, is that we think so much of how Martin Luther King Jr. lived and taught, and he taught about love and forgiveness, and it's really dawned on me, even after all these years together, even in a more clearer way, is that not only did he demonstrate that and live that, but he left that up to you to do in his death. Like, you lived and demonstrated your father's love of humanity, the love in how you dealt with his being taken away from you and your grandmother, his mother, and how you continue to operate, and not only in what you put into the world with your work, and what you put into the world with Yolanda and I, but what you put into the world with your interactions every day with people. You're a living embodiment, I think, of your father's legacy and lessons to us all.
And you're the beacon of light and hope and love, and a testament to your father's teachings and your mother's teachings in ways that I don't think most people understand and realize the power that you bring to this conversation because of your lived experiences. Hundreds of millions of people, if not billions of people, have listened to your father's voice and knows his famous words. Not as many people are familiar with Coretta Scott King, and especially are not familiar with who she was, not only as a leader, and she was in her own right, but just as a person. And your soon-to-be daughter-in-law, what was that relationship like?
Well, I still think that people don't really understand what an incredible leader she was in her own right. We wouldn't have the King holiday if it weren't for her. We really, I think, would not even have the legacy in a very real sense if it weren't for her protection and direction. Well, she and I shared a love of the opera. So we would attend the opera together, which was really special for me. But that certainly was wonderful. The last year of her life, I had the immense opportunity to spend a lot of one-on-one time with her. And I would spend every Friday night with her, just she and I. And so, some of my fondest memories are, both of us getting into our pajamas and watching the Golden Girls.
Awesome.
And one of the things now that I look back, because she would tell me so many stories about her growing up in Marion, Alabama, and just, some stories about, her in her early years of marriage to Martin's father. But now it almost was like she was infusing all of these stories in me from her own lips, that I could tell our daughter all of these stories about her grandmother, growing up in Marion, Alabama. That's not from an interview. That's not from a book. I also remember, too, every day, no matter what was going on at 4 o'clock, she would turn on the Oprah Winfrey show. Like she made sure that was, always playing at, 4 o'clock.
And let me add a little context to that, because at a certain point, the last 6 months of her life, she lost her voice because she had a stroke. But at 4 o'clock, she would point to the TV.
Point to the
Point to the TV.
Like, even when she couldn't say it,
Oh,
she
my
would
goodness.
point.
Time
and
for Oprah.
Yeah, it's like,
Yes.
She would point and
Love
everyone knew. Yeah.
That's awesome. And Arndrea, I love how the fact you've been channeling the divine feminine, especially the divine feminine of your mother as well, and the impact that she's had on your life. Can you just give us some sense?
My mother, who transitioned about 5 years ago, her name is Gladys Waters, and even every time I talk about her, I see Martin already. Martin is tearing up, because she was a tremendous force of nature, but most importantly, a tremendous force of love. She was the first Black nurse in her hometown of a very small town in Florida called Live Oak, Florida, Suwannee County. Went on to move to Tallahassee, Florida, and she actually, in the early 80s, during the beginnings of HIV and AIDS epidemic, she actually organized, taught, and even wrote and produced a video to show other nurses how to treat AIDS and HIV patients with compassion and love at a time when you had even healthcare workers not only afraid but not even willing. I see that. It's interesting because I think the world looks so much in our daughter. They look, of course, for Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, which they should. And I see so much of them in Yolanda. And I also see so much of my mom, who was Yolanda's, I would even say, her best friend.
Beautiful.
For many years, when we all would travel together, they had such an extremely close and wonderful relationship. And even to this day, when I go places that my mom worked, people will this happened just a few months ago. People will look at me and they just start crying and they just talk about who my mom was to them. So Craig, I'm wondering about your own family legacy. And actually, what inspired you to center your life on giving back?
Well, both Mark and I have been in the nonprofit world for 30 years now. And all of us around the table, we've been passionate about creating impact. And you each, I know, have shared the story of how your parents, both your parents, have inspired you. And for Mark and I, it was our folks also. On both sides of our family. On one side, on our father's side, our incredible grandfather who came with nothing, the classic immigrant story. And he couldn't speak a lick of English when he arrived in North America and became a bare-knuckle boxer and saved up enough money to open a convenience store, just providing for his family. But I'd say the one that Mark and I talk about a lot now that we raise our own kids, especially is our mom. Because our mom had a very tough childhood. Her father passed when she was very young. And so she and her 3 siblings, so 4 kids, all younger than 7, without a roof over their head at that point. They actually spent time partially homeless. And she talks about what it was like to experience the hunger on a birthday of just having a bologna sandwich and how meaningful that was. Or to this day, she still doesn't want to eat pasta because she's had so much of it. That's all they could afford through so much of her childhood. Or the tears that well up in her eye when she talks about the angel who was a neighbor who would bring warm pots of soup when it was raining and there was no cover around them and they were shivering cold. And our mother would never walk past someone who was experiencing homelessness without stopping. She would walk up to them and she would ask them their name and ask them, did they have a place to stay that night or did they know of a shelter or how she could help? And we were like, wow, why is our mom different than everyone else? And I remember at the time feeling even self-conscious about it, not understanding that the reason she did that was to build this bond of connection and humanization, partially because she understood what that was like from her own lived experience. And she never wanted us just to walk past without acknowledging the humanity of that person. That lesson was deeply profound when you recognize the humanity in every single individual and you recognize that, the old saying, there but for the grace of God go I, when you realize how fortunate we now, Mark and my generation, to have what we have because our parents helped us, but they had to overcome some really tough circumstances.
Mark, I think one of the stories you shared that told me about your work effort was the flipping of houses.
Yes, well, actually, it wasn't our flipping houses. It was our parents' flipping houses before flipping houses was on HGTV. And so before the Property Brothers was a thing, we were, with humility, somewhat kind of akin to the Property Brothers without the capital.
I've never thought of it that way.
There you go. There you go. Or the ability to sign contracts. But when we were young, so I think by the time I was 16 years old, I had lived in 12 different houses. And so our parents were teachers, and every summer they would buy at the beginning of the summer a new house and fix it up. We'd have to stay in the house for about a year to make sure that capital gains taxes were accommodated. Learned a lot about a capital gains tax as a teenager. And then a year later they would flip it, capital gains tax free, and do it over and over and over again. So at a young age, some kids have the Tooth Fairy or, of course, Santa Claus. Growing up, we had the wallpaper fairy.
Yes.
So the wallpaper fairy would come, and because Craig would try to put wallpaper up. Of course, we didn't do a good job. We'd go to bed, and in the morning we'd wake up, and the wallpaper was all in the perfect spot.
Oh.
And the wallpaper fairy would come and fix our wallpaper.
The wallpaper fairy helped little boys and little girls who helped their parents with renovations.
Yes.
This actually made
was a
sense
thing.
to us as a kid.
Yes.
Now, that's an interesting characterization.
Exactly. Well, we're not only doing this together, and of course the book project together, but we're also doing something called Realize the Dream together. And for those who are listening and watching, you can get a sense of the power of this. Of course, it's your dad's 100th anniversary of his birth coming up in a handful of years. And the goal that we're trying to accomplish to honor your father is?
One of the goals, I think, is to create a youth movement, and that movement being created through service. We're asking people to engage in a service activity, 100 million hours for the 100th birthday of Dad, 2029.
So the goal of 100 million hours of service to honor your father's 100th birthday on
That-
any issue and cause they care about, as
That's
long as they're
correct.
doing good, positive service for the
Yes.
world.
And
Yes.
what we believe is that this will be a way that we will unify and uplift. So it was going to be celebrated anyway, but we wanted more than a celebration. This is a moment for us. Can you imagine in 2029 when you have 100 million hours of service completed and all of the people that have participated, standing together and celebrating together about reminding us that, that we are so much greater and have so much more in common than that which divides us. For young people to not just read about Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, but be a part of a movement, to be a part of something larger and greater than themselves, and to really, to tap into that. And so that really is, as Yolanda reminds us, is 100 for 100.
100 for 100. Well, I love that. And I love the opportunity to be able to honor your father's legacy. And you look at what's happening in the world today. One of the recent words that was put in the Webster Dictionary is that of permacrisis. We live in a constant state of crisis. And it could be the environmental crisis or a mental health crisis or economic crisis or political crises. And we're just constantly dealing with crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis. And that crisis creates disconnection. That crisis creates unhappiness. That crisis creates a lack of understanding. And so for us to be able to lean in and bring back questions of hope, bring back stories of inspiration, bring back the fact that there are amazing people out there who deeply care, who are doing great things, and to bring back that ideology that candidly only the King family can bring about what we can do together that unifies us.
We are hopeful and we're grateful that our listeners will also be challenged and motivated. Every year there's a word of the year, but this year that word is polarization. That says a lot about who we are as a society. We're polarized not only from ourselves, we're polarized from our faith, we're polarized from within families, we're polarized with each other. And this is people are always talking about, now it's, becoming more and more about talking about how can we unite, how can we uplift. This is something real and tangible that we can all be a part of.
I look back at my journey, and back in 2020, I had hit rock bottom. I was physically, emotionally, spiritually exhausted. And it was just a very difficult set of circumstances and COVID and personal traumas and everything in between. And it took me a long time to come out of that dark space, a long time to find within myself, with my heart, within my soul, what was most important to me. And I think with humility, I think a lot of people are struggling. Some people might be in that dark space. Some people might be on the journey of trying to get themselves out of the dark space. But the journey is not easy. It's actually quite hard. When you have the opportunity to learn from others and be inspired from others, that journey becomes easier. This journey is just the beginning. We invite you to join us with what I promise will be an extraordinary series of conversations full of unexpected insights, untold stories, and powerful moments you won't find anywhere else.
Thank you for joining us. We are so grateful to have you as part of this journey. If you enjoyed today's conversation, subscribe and share the podcast with friends, family, and loved ones, and follow us on social media at My Legacy Movement. Until next time, may you find connection and inspiration to live your most fulfilled life.